Hi, I'm Justin Moorman.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast,
where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social-emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life. All right, welcome back to our next episode, Come As You Are, Trauma-Informed FBAs and BIPs. Before we jump into the topic overall, as always, we really just appreciate any of the support you guys give us. If you could leave a review if you haven't already, that goes a long way in helping us just get the conversation out to other people and to keep the conversation going for you. So we would really appreciate that. Preferably 5 stars, but I guess if you want to give us a poor review, you know what? We'll read that too, and we'll try to make ourselves better. So we appreciate that, and thank you for that. Again, Come As You Are, Trauma-Informed FBAs and BIPs. We welcome Alice. I almost, because it's written as Allison, and that really threw me off.
That's her professional name.
Well, that's my name.
Yeah.
So there's
I've
that.
literally never called
But
you that.
never. That's okay.
Ever. So we have Allie Masters back and Brianna Sarr-Kerman, who have written just an enormous amount and have worked with FBAs and BIPs plenty, and who we've partnered with during trainings and things like that to help pass on and train people on trauma-informed FBAs and BIPs. So welcome back to you guys. And Katie, I'll kind of let you talk about why we're doing this episode.
Yeah, let me just say too, I'm very proud of Brianna and Allie. Really have revolutionized the way we have approached FBAs because they've given us no information or data about kids, and they've really looked at creating a new way of really supporting kids holistically. So I'm excited for them to share what that process looks like. And this is probably our most asked question we get through the podcast is about the trauma-informed FBAs and BIPs, and probably our most requested training. And I feel like we have a good handle on providing training now for that and platforms to do that. So if you are interested in trauma-informed FBA and BIP training, reach out to us through our email address, and we will connect with the organization to have Allie and Brianna come out and do that. So just thought I'd put a shameless plug there while we do that too. So here it is. We are writing functional behavior assessments, better known as FBAs, if you're in the club and understand the lingo, like crazy due to state laws or a grasp of finding support with the high needs of behavior currently in schools. But we see little or no change in our current forms. They don't provide us any real support or data. You all have revolutionized this process to make sense and support kids using educational neuroscience and research. So I would love for you to share, when we say trauma-informed functional behavior assessments or behavior intervention plans in the trauma-informed lens, what do those components look like so people understand what we're talking about when we say that? So let's go ahead and start.
What we'll do is for this one we'll kind of go through and we'll kind of, not that if it's one, Allie or Brianna that you guys have kind of prepared for, we kind of split it up, but by all means either of you jump in at either spot to kind of tack stuff in or add stuff in. What we'll do is we'll go through the different components and just answer each of explain what each one is. So that's kind of how this is going to be set up. If you're looking for maybe an explanation of more of what even an FBA is or a behavior intervention plan is, I'm sure there are ways you can find that. It's not necessarily like what we're doing right here. We're gonna, not that we won't kind of cover that, I guess, but we're going over a little bit more of like the nitty gritty components of it.
Of what a trauma-informed lens looks like for this.
All right, so Brianna, we'll kind of start with you. Can you talk a little bit about ABC data and observation?
Absolutely. So ABC stands for antecedent behavior consequence data, and it is what a traditional FBA utilizes, okay? We still utilize ABC data in a trauma-informed FBA as well because it can be really helpful to reduce bias, target patterns of behavior, look at trends, settings, etc. So ABC data is a beneficial component, but it's certainly not enough in isolation. So we know that behavior doesn't happen in a vacuum. And antecedent behavior consequence data kind of bases the entire theory about the behavior on the idea that a child is trying to get or avoid something. And in a very controlled setting with no other variables, that could be true, but we're humans and it's far more complex than that. So that's just my disclaimer about ABC data because I do use it in every FBA that I do. I do feel it's beneficial. I just know that it's not comprehensive enough. So the ABC data really looks at looking at what happens in right before a target behavior occurs. So a target behavior is like the behavior we're tracking, like maybe it's throwing things, maybe it's kicking, maybe it's hitting, maybe it's eloping, like leaving a designated area. The target behavior is the behavior that's getting in the way for students. And what we want to look at is what is the setting that they were in when that behavior occurred? We want to look at the time of day, look for trends there. We want to look at what happened immediately before the behavior. Like, did an adult give a request? Did they get a redirection? Did a kid say something to them? Those are the antecedents of what happens right before. Then you track the target behavior. The consequence isn't like a punishment. It's like what happens right after the target behavior. So did they get a redirection? Were they given a choice? Did they get a sensory break, etc.? And the reason we collect this data is because we often have our suspicions about why a behavior is occurring. Well, it always happens in unstructured times, which very well may be true. But it's helpful to look at the other things that happen right before a behavior, because sometimes, even if it's during unstructured times, there may be a particular pattern or a trend that we haven't noticed before. ABC data is relatively simple to collect if you do it right, so that it's easy for teams to track as behaviors occur throughout the school day. So it just allows us to kind of analyze the behavior and quantify some of those behavioral patterns that we think we see happening. It's important that teams, when they're collecting ABC data, have a tool that's easy to use, that's very clear, and that is they're all trained on. So they know how to collect the data and they're on the same page about that. It can also help us identify needs within a building, within a setting, with particular individuals. So that's why we use that information. And most states that require FBAs, if there's instances of restraint or seclusion, if there's suspensions, you're legally required to do FBAs in most states. The state forms almost exclusively focus upon ABC data. So I think that's beneficial, but again, it's not enough. It's necessary maybe, but not sufficient.
Yeah, and I like that too. That's a good point, because I think one of the things that we tend to do is, as we shift anything in not just education, I think in life, sometimes we swing too far and we get rid of everything that we did before. And I like that this isn't the first time I've heard you say it, even on our podcast, I believe, but like that's not necessarily the case. Like, there's still value in it. We just don't want to rely solely on that, and we shouldn't just swing so far that we dismiss everything that we were doing before. So I think that's an important point.
Yeah.
And I think ABC data can also be used to help identify gaps in Tier 1 instruction. So it can be used in a classroom format as well to help identify if there's a class-wide or a Tier 1 level problem too, which is beneficial for everybody, not just the kid that we're doing an FBA for.
Yeah. With that, can you share a little bit why we would add like a sample observation in an FBA as well? Why should we do that?
So classroom observations can be really beneficial because it can help you catch things that you might not, that the teacher or the student might not be aware of. Some of those subtle nonverbal communication things that can be antecedents to behaviors. The caution with classroom observations is that you can never base something entirely on a classroom observation because it's just one point in time. Yeah. So some behaviors occur throughout the course of a school day, and they're easy to capture through observation, right? Because they're happening multiple times throughout the entire day. Other behaviors only occur in more limited settings or limited circumstances, and that can be beneficial if you're looking at the duration or intensity of a behavior, but it's hard to just go in at a random time and capture it. So observations can be definitely beneficial for the team in the problem-solving piece, but the word of caution with those is that it's not always possible to capture the behavior, the target behavior during an observation or even repeated observations. The other thing with an observation is that depending on who's doing the observation, sometimes just your presence in a setting impacts the dynamics and the setting itself. So sometimes that can inadvertently do things, which is why it's important to have ABC data and other interview forms that are collected over a period of time.
All right, Allie. We ask usually the team to provide current interventions. Why is that an important component when we look at the trauma-informed FBAs?
Current interventions are really important because it's not just about documenting what we tried. It's about understanding why certain strategies worked or why they didn't work. So sometimes our interventions fail because they weren't appropriately matched to the students' actual skill deficits or their needs. And sometimes they weren't implemented consistently enough with fidelity to give the student a fair shot to see if the intervention actually would work. So by really digging into what we've already tried and what's working, what's not working, we can avoid continuing to use ineffective practices and move forward with strategies that are actually informed by what's really going on in the student's real experience.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, that's good to keep in mind for sure. Brianna, parent interviews. Talk a little bit about that and how those look maybe in a typical FBA versus these trauma-informed FBAs.
So in a typical FBA, I think it depends on the type of parent interview you're doing and the type of information you're asking for. If you're just looking at, does the child demonstrate behaviors at home, yes or no, you may or may not get beneficial information. I think always parents know their kids best. So whether they know exactly what their kid is doing in every different setting or how that looks, they may or may not be aware of that, but they are aware of what they do at home and what the child responds to at home and how the child is behaving in other settings. And so I think some of the power in the parent interview is getting some additional insight into what makes that kid tick, what they're reinforced by, if it's happening at home, what do they do, what strategies are effective for them if they have some, what strategies do not work. That's helpful information to know as well. And then I think one of the biggest benefits is figuring out if there are settings in which these behaviors do not occur, and then figuring out why. Because a lot of times, if there's something in another setting that is helping a child to be more successful, if we can replicate portions of that at school, we're going to naturally assist in reducing that behavior. I think the other thing that's important about a parent interview is the parents are members of the team, and they have to have input in that problem-solving process. And we need them to partner with the school team to help reinforce what we're doing at school and to help communicate some of those similar strategies, interventions, et cetera, that we're using at school with the child at home so that there's consistency across home and school settings. It's really a partnership, and that's what we're trying to establish. I think even traditional FBAs, if you're incorporating parent input, they're still looking for some of those same features. I don't know that there's necessarily a different portion specific to trauma-informed FBAs about the parent interview itself. Yeah. I think some of the things we ask parents to complete, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, those are different. But I think the parent interview itself, the goal of it and the type of information that you're trying to obtain is pretty similar.
You know, the other person that we often don't consider when we're doing some of these FBAs, one, the parents are a crucial part of that team. Two, we often do not ask the student anything. So, Allie, can you kind of share a little bit why the student interview would be an important part of this process?
Yeah. When I first started writing FBAs, I was writing the traditional ABC data FBAs, and I was finding that they just weren't helping. The team spent a lot of time collecting data. We would spend a lot of time talking about that data and talking about the negative behavior, but we didn't really have a path moving forward. Mm-hmm. We knew kind of our best guess as to why these behaviors were occurring, but we didn't really have a path forward. And the most crucial part that kept nagging at me was that we didn't have the student perspective. When we did those FBAs. So that was kind of part of the shift too, is that I was like, we're not even asking the kid what's going on. We're not even asking them what's wrong. Right. How can we help? So the student interview to me is one of the most important pieces of the FBA. It's where we start to shift from our adult perspective of what's happening to really understanding what's going on in their body, in their mind, what's happening with them. So it's not just about, doing another checklist or collecting more ABC data. It's really, really, again, bringing them into the process. So we ask questions like what time of the day feels hard? What parts of the day feel successful to you? What do you wish that the adults working with you could understand about you? We really kind of dive into those questions, and you would be really surprised at the insight that these kids have if you just ask. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, kids will be like, no one's really asked me that before. Which is kind of sad, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't. That's not to shame anybody, because sure. As teachers, we're so busy. We have so many things going on, and we're trying to help all of these kids. You don't really think about asking those very simple questions sometimes because you're doing a million things at once. But you don't have to have an FBA to ask these questions. I do
Right.
want to point that out.
Yeah.
So yeah, the student interview is super important, and the level of insight you can gain from just having a conversation with the student is a really, really important piece.
And what a good little micro interaction to establish a relationship connection point. So when we're asking people to fill out the student interview, it is really important that we try to think about trusted adults, maybe, or somebody that's working with the child. It's always easy for one of us to grab them and do it.
Yep.
But a really time to show intentional interest into a child for the staff member that's actually going to be following through with some of these plans.
I just worked on one last week where the teacher spent a lot of time doing the student interview with the student, and that teacher was just blown away. She said, it was such a great experience for both of us. And I feel like since we had that time where we went through that interview, things have been better for him. Things have been better in my classroom. Things have been better in the gen ed classroom. So even just that piece, that student feeling heard and valued, has improved his behavior, has improved his functioning within the classroom. So
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
I think that's a crucial piece of when we talk about relationships, because I think one of the things that, as we've talked about before, the misperceptions of trauma-informed care is like, well, everybody says we just have to have better relationships with our kids, and we know our kids. That's the type of skill set that we're talking about, like engaging in a problem-solving process with a kid and getting to know them at that level is that first step in that process of doing something with a child instead of to a child, right? And the relationship piece isn't just knowing some facts about them, because I think all of our teachers, they love their kids, they know their kids, and they know a lot about them. But when you ask some of these questions, you get a different type of insight. And that's the type of connection that a lot of our kids with behaviors are seeking.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too. Like sometimes we need a little bit of a framework and you'd say like a nudge in that right direction, but I think it's easy for teachers to feel like there's no way I could possibly do this with all of my students, and then how do I possibly pick? But when all of a sudden we're in a spot where we're being asked to do a student interview and maybe there are specific questions, it just gives a little bit of framework and gives us that nudge in that right direction to do that. And it is impressive to see what students have to say, because they typically have some kind of insight that's pretty important. Brianna, looking at our next part, this thinking skills inventory, can you kind of describe what that is and why that's important?
Yeah, so thinking skills or lagging skills are really one of the core components of a trauma-informed FBA, because when you have an expectation for a kid, and if the child has the skill set to complete the expectation, they meet the expectation, they do what you ask them to do, and that's an adaptive behavior, right? But if you have an expectation and the child has lagging skills or skills that are not yet developed to be able to meet that expectation, that's where you get maladaptive behavior, or the behaviors of concern, the target behaviors that we track in FBAs. And it's really important to look through the lagging skills, because typically when you're looking at a trauma-informed FBA, you are looking at it through the lens that there's some unsolved problem that the child has that's resulted in a skill set or lagging skills that have not yet developed. And the idea is, rather than doing positive reinforcement or a sticker chart or what have you, trying to impact motivation in a particular setting, you're looking at helping the child build a skill set that will help them resolve that problem. And if you resolve that problem, the behavior doesn't need to occur anymore. The maladaptive behavior isn't necessary. Most maladaptive behaviors are just kids trying to meet some need that they have with a skill set they don't yet have, right? So some universal need they may have, which Ali will talk about in a minute, or trying to do something in that setting to try and meet that expectation is just not what we want them to be doing. So thinking skills or lagging skills really look at various skill sets across a few different domains. So one is language and communication, attention and working memory, looking at emotional regulation, emotional and self-regulation, social thinking, like taking the perspective of other people, and cognitive flexibility. So being able to shift between things, think flexibly. A lot of our kids with major behaviors that we are tracking through FBAs have weaknesses in multiple areas. One of the things that I find is that a lot of the kids that I work with have strength in the language and communication domain, which is really beneficial because that's a skill set you can build on, and it's one one that you very obviously see, right? Because when you talk to a kid, if they have adequate language and communication skills, that's a great starting point. A lot of the kids struggle with the regulation and the cognitive flexibility in particular. That they just get very rigid and they're not able to shift their attention between things or imagine different possibilities or problem solve. But knowing those things is really beneficial because that's how we develop a behavior plan to support them, because we can target those specific lagging skills through the activities that we do in a behavior plan with them. And it really allows us to assess that underlying problem so we can resolve the problem. Because if you resolve the problem, the behavior is going to go away. And you don't need like a motivational chart or something else to do it. You just need to help the child with that skill.
Yeah, I would say too, I found this probably to be one of the most beneficial pieces for him, that trauma-informed FBA, looking at the underlying and needing to develop skills. And I think this is the part that kind of helps answer some questions. And if we would look at any of us, we all have lacking skills on this list. So I think sometimes I want to make sure people don't think we're like defeating. And you remember with brain development, some of those skills age-wise are not yet developed or later developing skills, and that's okay too. But each one of us would have lacking skills. This isn't specific to kids that have some behavioral issues that we're all working. We all have that coworker that has working on those social thinking skills. We're such pragmatics, right? Everybody's got a thing going on. All right, Allie, universal needs. Can you explain what those are and what you're looking for?
I would love to. Universal needs is another one of my favorite pieces of the FBA. And speaking of lagging skills, I made myself notes for this because I could go off topic very, very easily with universal needs because I love it so much, and it's such a broad, there's so many things to talk about. So I'm going to stick to my notes. I promise all of you.
Okay.
But when I started using the Universal Needs Survey in the FBAs, everything kind of just started to make sense. Pairing that with the lagging skills and the student, and the Universal Needs just kind of rounded everything out. So instead of just asking about the function using the ABC data, instead of just saying, what function does this behavior serve, we ask, what universal need is this student trying to meet? So universal needs come from Dr. Martin Brokenleg from the Circle of Courage framework, and he takes educational psychology and indigenous wisdom and kind of meshes those together, which is really, really awesome. And it reminds us that we have 4 universal needs that students or humans need in order to thrive. And those needs are belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity. So when these needs are met, students feel safe, they feel connected, they feel capable. When these needs are not met, or if they are met in a way that we call distorted, so if they have different ways of getting these needs met, we often see behaviors that are defiance, avoidance, consistent dysregulation. But actually, these behaviors, like you were saying about the maladaptive and adaptive, these are adaptive behaviors. So our nervous system is doing what it feels like it needs to survive. So they're actually survival strategies.
Trying to meet their universal needs that have not yet been met.
That's right. So belonging is about just feeling connected. It's about feeling like the people around you care about you and you matter to them. Mastery is about success, experiencing success, not just participation, but real competence and progress in skills. Independence is about having voice and agency, being trusted to make decisions within your environment. And generosity is about contributing, so feeling like you have something meaningful to give to others, and that you're valued member of your community. So when we write FBAs through this needs-based lens, we're not just saying, like, how do we stop this behavior? We're really kind of diving deeper and saying, what is this behavior communicating, and how can we help them meet that need in a way that is healthy and that builds those skills?
Yeah.
Can you, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, this might be a good time to share. I think one of the things you're not going to hear us talk about is we're going to do an ACE survey, the Adverse Childhood Experiences. Mm-hmm. Can you share, because we're talking about universal needs and maybe the lack of development. I think some folks might connect that to childhood adversities. Can you share why the ACE survey is not going to be included in a trauma-informed FBA?
Yeah, and I'm just very simply, because it doesn't matter. We are working with what we have right now, and resilience is all about what we can pour into someone to help them build those skills from this point forward. And when I say it doesn't matter, that sounds kind of harsh. I'm not saying that experience didn't matter, but what I'm saying is that we don't need to know what happened, right? I think there's kind of a back and forth with, we want to know what happened to you. Instead of asking what's wrong with you, we ask what happened to you. And that is great. I like, that's a mindset shift that I think we all needed to have. But at this point, I'm concerned that we are staying in the what happened to you instead of moving forward.
How can I help
Right.
you or serve you?
Yeah. So I used to include ACE studies because I did think at one point, I mean, we all learn and grow, right? So I was thinking like, that does matter. We do need to know what happened to this child in order to help them. But the more I did it, the more I'm like, really, that's not giving me much information. And it was, a struggle for the families to want to share. And I don't blame them. You don't always want to relive all of the things that have happened to you in your life. So it's really about, where are we right now and what universal needs are we struggling with? Which ones are absent, which ones are distorted, and how can we really intervene and build those skills to help fulfill those needs in an adaptive way.
And I think with the ACE studies too, one of the things that we found is that if you include an ACE survey, and to the people that are discussing it, if they don't consider it to be trauma, like big T trauma, then it's easier to dismiss some of those things as behavioral choices.
Yes.
And I think that's a really big caution, and part of why we have really stopped using ACE surveys, because there's a perception that a trauma-informed FBA is only a valid tool to use or only necessary, and a trauma-informed approach is only necessary if a child has experienced big T trauma and a certain number of ACEs. And that's just simply not true, because again, it's all about where they're at. It's about what skill set they have and what we can do to enhance the skill set, increase resiliency, and make them more successful. So when Allie says it doesn't matter, that's what we mean. It doesn't, because whether a child has had 10 ACEs or 0 ACEs, if their universal needs and lagging skills are similar, we are going to still need to address those underlying needs, regardless of what their background is. And we don't want kids to be experiences and needs to be dismissed simply because they don't meet some criteria on a survey.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's a really good explanation of that, because I think that can be confusing when we wonder why, something that's been kind of in the forefront for a while is maybe not something that we're including. And it's not that it's bad or anything like that, but I think your guys' explanation of it was really good.
And I do think the ACE study does matter systemically. I think it's really important to continue studying and to continue following people with ACEs, but not in an FBA format. And then also, I think, like you said, it kind of pigeonholes the student to where the team working with that student either just feels sorry for the student or consistently just puts everything back on, oh, well, that's the trauma talking. No, we want to look at this student through a resilience and strength-based lens.
Yeah, and I would say to keep in mind, too, that we are an educational setting and not a therapeutic setting, and we should not confuse those two and what our needs and goals are.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Brianna, talk to us a little bit about the love language survey.
Sure. So love language surveys are really important because they help establish the type of recognition or connection that kids need and benefit from the most. And it's really important to note, because if there are students who have a particular love language that matters to them and that they seek, that's how we need to engage with them. And when we talk about connecting with our students and having relationships with our students and making them feel supported, one of the best ways to do that is to figure out what type of connection they're seeking. So when we look at it, we're looking at physical touch, words of affirmation, quality time, gifts, or acts of service. And particularly when you're working with students who don't have as strong of resiliency skills, and if they have some of these things that they do not like particular forms of reinforcement, that's important to know. So a lot of the kids that we work with do not like physical touch. That is not a love language for them. It doesn't make them feel happy. So we don't do it, right? But a lot of them like words of affirmation. Quality time is a huge one for a lot of our kids. It's important to know that, because even within that domain, even if it's like gifts, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're constantly buying tangibles or little trinkets for kids. It's about how you're connecting and engaging with the kid and what makes them feel most supported and what really helps meet their need for belonging. And so when we do those things well, when we're speaking to them in their love language, that's helping us connect with them. It's making them feel connected to us. It's helping with their sense of belonging. And it's giving them a form of reinforcement that's meaningful to them. Far more meaningful than if we like add up their stickers on a sticker chart or give them a trinket or, a reward or something. And I think when you think of like PBIS systems, which are required, everywhere, there's a lot of benefits and good ideas there, but the implementation of that has kind of fallen away from things looking at individual students and how they really enjoy connecting with people and what really is reinforcing for them, and focuses a lot on extrinsic things. The love languages survey helps us to engage with them in a more meaningful way.
Yeah. No, I think that's good too. I think that idea of shifting away from some of those extrinsic rewards or ways of trying to help shift behavior is super important, because those things aren't everywhere. Whereas if we can focus in on helping them understand who they are more, and then what helps them individually more, and help all the adults that are working with these students, that makes just such a huge difference in how things work long term, right? Like as opposed to some short term approaches, which is ultimately less productive.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest thing I've learned watching Justin is that there is no fluff, right? I'm not buying you lunch on Friday. I'm not getting you things. It's the relationship.
All of a sudden, Justin sounds like a real mean teacher.
Yeah. But it is some of those other love language survey. You talk about those things. Those, I think the biggest mistake I see young teachers coming in and handling behavior is that they try to bribe, or parents, or we see this all the time with parenting, it's very difficult. We try to bribe kids with things. And I think if we really dive into their love language surveys, it's not the things that are helping manage them. It's the routine, consistency, predictability, and unconditional love that really helps see through kids' behavior, and that you don't have to be this fun teacher all the time, because that will wear down real soon.
Yes.
Don't worry, Justin. You don't have to be
apparently
fun.
I'm not the fun teacher.
Well,
No,
and
I think that's such a big deal though, because I think we, like some of those other things, do feel like they get quicker results, but then the results aren't necessarily as long lasting. Whereas it might take more time to get a more meaningful, longer lasting result. But sometimes we panic when things aren't going well, and we want stuff to be over as quick as possible. And but that doesn't always get us to the spot that is
sustainable.
Right.
It's not sustainable.
And I think a lot of times our reinforcers, extrinsic reinforcers, and even positive reinforcement to a certain extent is still largely based in compliance and control.
Sure.
And so again, that trauma-informed piece is really important. One of the components that's really important of the trauma-informed piece is working on resolving those problems, helping the child build skill and build connection. So that's the focus, not on control. The behavior and increased compliance is almost a byproduct of us meeting their needs.
100%, because we can't control students. We can't
Nope.
control their behavior.
Yeah.
We can't force compliance.
Nope.
We try to force compliance, but we can't.
But you can't.
And what happens when we try to force compliance? A lot of times when students have unmet needs and have lagging skills, that's when we see these big behaviors.
Yeah.
So really diving into all of these concepts of the FBA helps us through those tricky behaviors, especially when we're trying to force compliance. And it really kind of opens the team members' eyes as to maybe why those traditional methods aren't working for them.
It's a perfect segue. Allie, tell us about like the summary components. We've done all this work. We've got all information back. There's going to be someone who's the primary writer for this report. And then the writer is going to look at all the information the team's collected and they're going to write a summary. What should we expect or look at a trauma-informed summary of an FBA?
So really this just puts it all together into kind of like a narrative so that everyone at the table can really understand each section of the FBA. We're not just listing a bunch of data points. We're not just listing, 75% in the gen ed setting, the antecedent is this. So we're really bringing it all together in a meaningful way so that everyone on the team can truly understand our idea of why this behavior is happening. So we're talking about what is the student's experience right now in this moment. We're talking about what skills are missing. We're summarizing those skills that are missing. We're summarizing which needs are unmet or which needs are being met in a way that is unhelpful to the student. And then we're talking about which interventions have and haven't worked. And this all really helps us develop a well thought out and meaningful behavior intervention plan that is trauma informed, neuro aware, and really, really usable by the team instead of just checking a box, instead of just saying, yep, we have the FBA, yep, we have the BIP, now what, right? This actually helps us develop a plan that we can put into practice and really, really help the student.
Yeah, I think that's good, and that's such an important part, right? It's what the name is. It's summarizing, but it's really pulling all these parts together and coming up with that plan. So when we've got this completed, Brianna, what are those next steps in this process after we're done with this part of it?
So the next step is to develop a behavior intervention plan. And that's the end goal, because the FBA tells us all of this information about the student and all of their needs and the different impact that different settings and approaches have on the student. But the BIP, or the behavior intervention plan, that's what we do about it. So what do we do about it? That's the next step. And so at the end of an FBA, we're really looking at our generating hypotheses. So when whatever expectation is introduced, the child does whatever behavior, or it doesn't match that expectation because of a deficit in these lagging skills. And we utilize the lagging skills that were identified through the thinking skills or lagging skills worksheet, but we couple that with the universal needs, the ABC data, and the love languages survey to comprehensively look at what are the biggest areas that we need to target first. And in the behavior intervention plan, that's where we're going to talk about what we're going to do what are the proactive things we do across settings at school to help the child stay regulated. We look at what are we going to do as soon as they get there in the morning to get them regulated if they're not. What are we going to do to help them stay regulated? And then what are we going to do if they get dysregulated to help them re-regulate? Those are kind of the day-to-day things that we need to do to help the student based upon all that information in the FBA. And then the next step is what are we going to do to build those lagging skills? Because there's very specific targeted activities and interventions we can do that are going to increase their universal needs and will also teach those lagging skills so that they increase the skill set.
All right, so I think that's the part that we would have like an intervention specialist or somebody on the team to help, right? And that's where going to be things that you would also see would be a data collection point would be attached to each one of those things because we're going to progress monitor that BIP.
Yes.
Or it may be progress monitor through an IEP goal, but this could happen for kids that are on IEPs or not on IEPs. So anybody who's having behavioral difficulties, we're just going to use data collection and then reconvene and meet as a team because what are we doing with the data? We're going to make adjustments if needed. What challenges do you encounter as you encounter with this process, Allie? What are some things that or some hiccups that somebody would run into?
Excuse me. So just some challenges with data collection. Sometimes that ABC data is challenging up front for teams. It looks a little bit overwhelming. So I just remind them that this is just for a snapshot in time. We're not doing this forever. We're not asking you to collect this data forever. And just really explaining the why behind why we're collecting this data so that the team fully understands what this data is going to do for them and for the student. We have to be very clear about that to kind of sidestep that challenge so that we don't have people frustrated from the beginning. Another one is not completing the student interview, missing that student voice. Again, with FBAs, there's a lot of moving parts to it, and sometimes I have found that, teams might say, oh my gosh, I forgot to do the student interview. So that's typically when that happens, I will push the FBA back because that's such a important piece of the FBA. So just really, that's a big challenge, is just bringing all of the pieces together. So we want to make sure we have a really clear plan form and a really clear plan for which team member is going to do what. And then very simply, just the pressure to have a quick fix for this behavior. That's something that you have to really work through with the team, and really make sure everyone on the team understands that behavior change takes time. And just because we're doing this FBA does not mean we're going to identify the problem and fix the problem immediately. So really making sure that the team is on the same page, that we're all on the same page, so that we're helping the kid, and that we understand that it's not going to just be, we're not just putting a Band-Aid on it. We're going to actually get to the real issue behind what's driving the behavior and help them build those skills, which takes a long time, right?
Yeah, it may not be just done. Like, just because we finished the meeting and we have the 2 documents doesn't mean it's finished.
Right.
Like, that's really kind of the next step. And it is going to take time, and it is going to be worth it, though, hopefully, or at least we're going to figure out that maybe we need to make another shift, and we're not going to just keep spinning our wheels. But I think that's super important. That it is, just because those things are done and we now have paper, like we didn't like do it. Like, we're not done now. As we get ready to wrap up, what's one thing that you'd want people to walk away knowing from this episode? Katie, I'll start with you and we'll kind of just go around.
Okay. I would say that this will be a game changer for your teams. The traditional ABC data collection or traditional FBAs I have found to be, in my 20 years of special education, little to no use. And that I'm telling you, the trauma-informed FBAs and this approach, we have seen tremendous success with kids with a lot of difficulties, a lot of dysregulations. This is going to create partnerships with your families. This is going to create staff buy-in. You're going to actually find real support and holistic needs met for kids. And then once we start meeting those basic needs, then the academic data has proven to really soar. So again, this really aligned to your MTSS process and that tier 3 plus kind of level of interventions. Great thing to partner with your school psych on. You don't have to be a school psych to do it, but certainly if you have a good school psych, that certainly helps. And I guess, again, as a shameless plug, hopefully when this episode airs out, we'll have a opportunity kind of set up for training dates that we'll kind of promote with this, that we are going to work through that to kind of offer some trauma-informed FBA and BIP training through our organization. And I think you would find it tremendously beneficial for your team. So,
Allie, what about you? What's one thing you want people to walk away knowing?
That's a hard one to follow.
Because
I agree with everything you say. Really, just I want us to stop trying to fix kids. And instead start building systems of support around them. The kids aren't broken. Our systems are.
100%.
So let's start using some of these frameworks like the trauma-informed FBA and BIP to build the kids up and to take the skills and strengths that they have and capitalize on those and stop looking at some of these deficits and lagging skills and absent universal needs as points against them, and instead really focus on building them up and filling in those gaps.
That's good. Brianna?
I think the biggest takeaway should be that it's worth it and it works. And I know it's hard for teams to visualize the end product when they're in the thick of it, and especially when they're dealing with really challenging behaviors. But shifting the mindset to a trauma-informed and restorative mindset helps us meet those needs. We cannot meet the child's needs if we're focused solely on control and compliance. It just does not work, and actually it can do a lot more damage to both the relationship you have with the kid as well as to their skill sets that are not yet developed. So I think that's the thing. The kids are worth it, and it is well worth your investment in time to go through this process and to shift your mindset, because if you do, you're going to see better results, many fewer behaviors, and you're going to feel more successful and less stressed. So it's worth it.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just that idea we were talking a little bit about, that idea of control or compliance or things like that. And I think if you can shift your mind away from that, part of what this helps you do, hopefully, is again, build those support systems. I think, Allie, like you were saying, to help the students actually have control themselves. Do we provide a framework for that with some of these really tough situations, tough behaviors, tough students that are having like the most struggle at any given time? Yeah, we still have to have those frameworks built in, those boundaries built in, expectations built in. But really what we're doing is we're trying to figure out a specific framework that works for that student, a student that the typical general framework hasn't worked for.
Right.
And so now we provide something that's just slightly different, hopefully, but we're providing that framework in a way that allows them to feel the success themselves, and they have the control themselves. They're making a lot more decisions. They're making a lot more calls on what they're doing within a framework that is still safe and accessible and appropriate that we are setting up, right? It's not just throwing all that out. And I think when we do that, we watch kids not only start becoming a lot more successful in our typical matrix that we're kind of evaluating them on, but we also watch them become a lot more successful and engaged, happy, feeling like they are doing something that they're doing well, and they all of a sudden are very proud of themselves, and they own that because it is them. It's not that they finally jammed themselves into a framework that we created, but they're doing it because we help them figure out the framework that works for them. So that's what this helps us do. It takes us a long way in that process. And again, you're not going to just do this one time too and be like, we figured out all the answers and it's good to go. You're going to tweak it. You're going to, we heard Allie and Brianna talk many times. They're tweaking the system still always. We're always looking to be better. Yeah. We're always looking to add and subtract and make sure that we're doing things better in the best way that we can. And so you're going to do that too, as you kind of pick this up and do it yourself, and kind of take what we hopefully are able to pass on to you and make it your own. As always, man, we really appreciate you guys joining in the conversation with us. Hopefully this is helpful. Again, this is a little bit of a deeper, I guess, episode. Hopefully, if you are somebody that is involved in this process of FBAs, BIPs, things like that, hopefully you found something useful from it. If you have questions, and I think this would be an important one. If you have questions for an episode like this, reach out to us. Let us know. You're probably better finding the email address that Katie has Katie's name on it than mine. I'm just going to throw that out there, Katie. But you absolutely reach out. Ask us questions. Look for, again, those ideas or those times that we might have coming up where we do something that's more than a 40-odd some minute training, right? Or a podcast episode about it. But look for that if it's something that you're interested in from us. And I think hopefully you hear that this is valuable. Share it with somebody, share it with your team, talk it over after you listen to the episode about how you might shift your processes. And let's go out there and do the work.
Let's go do it.